management. In this module, we will explore project, stakeholder, and communication management. Here's what you will learn in this module. 70 to 80% of a project manager's job is to communicate with all the stakeholders on the project, from the technician who has just replaced the hard drive in your computer to the vice president of finance, who ensures that your project has sufficient funding. In fact, PMI, the Project Management Institute, has allocated 2 knowledge areas to successful interpersonal relationships: project communication management and project stakeholder management. That alone shows how it is so utterly important for any project manager, or really for anyone who ever hopes to work in a team-driven organization, to understand how to find all the stakeholders in a project and how to use communication tools wisely. To achieve this, we will discuss how to identify and describe the processes associated with the project management body of knowledge area called project stakeholder management and project communications management as well. We will also talk about how to identify stakeholders inside and outside the organization, how to classify them so that you can manage their expectations more effectively, and then we will discuss how to establish a stakeholder management plan and clarify each stakeholder's responsibilities in a RACI or RACI chart. You can't really separate project stakeholder management from project communication management very well. So let's begin by taking the 2 PMBOK knowledge areas and see how they interact. As you can see on this slide, the project communication and stakeholder management process areas go together. Before you can plan stakeholder management, though, you first need to understand who your stakeholders actually are. Then, as you figure out which of your stakeholders need what kind of information about the project, that's when you plan your stakeholder management and at the same time your communications management as well. You will need those plans as early as possible in the project because remember, 80% or so of a project manager's job is to communicate. So once you've set up your communication rhythms and you have your email lists or Slack or WhatsApp groups and your SharePoint dashboards in place, it's important to ensure that you send out the data you promised, when you promised them, and to whom you promised them, making sure that every stakeholder who needs to receive communication from you also gets this communication and has adequate time to comment, approve, or ask questions and knows who their contact people are. This is where monitoring communications and stakeholder engagement truly intersect. Let's now take a closer look at project stakeholder management. So what is a project stakeholder? PMI's definition explains it quite well. A stakeholder is an individual, group, or organization that may affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project. As you can see in the graphic to the right, stakeholders can come from all levels of the organization. This includes the finance department and the executives who allocated funding to the project sponsor. Yes, that's the money you are spending on your project. This also includes the functional managers who run the departments in which the people on your team are working. There are other project managers who are running projects that might connect with yours or who are not getting the funding they need because you were faster to apply for it to cover your project risks. They are project contractors because they're providing you with services based on the contracts you have negotiated with them and hoping to get paid from your project funds, of course. Then there's the team, your team, that needs thoughtful leadership, risk management, and technical guidance in order to be as productive as possible. And if you had thought that that's a lot of stakeholders already, we're not done with the biggest group. Anyone else who might be interested in your project or who makes rules that govern your project. These can be legal entities that might audit your technical and administrative documents for, say, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, your end users and their employees, members of a user group, even the CFO's Saturday morning golfing buddy who is in charge of your company's cafeteria and has an opinion on everything. The truth is, you're lucky if you know who all the stakeholders of your project are within the first month of running it. Always be on the lookout. So, someone new is always waiting to be included and may be upset if they're not. This is why it is important to think much beyond your project when identifying stakeholders. Often your project sponsor can help you identify external stakeholders in a waterfall situation, or if you are the product owner in an agile context, your CFO might be a great resource to ask about who else might need to be included in your project communication. Honestly, most of your problems with running a project can stem from people inside or outside your organization who should be involved or even just consulted, but are unaware of your project and find out about it through the grapevine. These are the people who can become a problem for you when they try to influence the project stakeholders who are actively involved, such as your technical team or your project sponsor, especially if they believe that they are negatively impacted by your project. That is why it is absolutely vital to look at the people in the outer circle of this graphic, if not beyond, and PMI states that stakeholder satisfaction should be identified and managed as a project objective. Here's what they write. The key to effective stakeholder engagement is a focus on continuous communication with all stakeholders, including team members, to understand their needs and expectations, address issues as they occur, manage conflicting interests, and foster appropriate stakeholder engagement in project decisions and activities. If you haven't already guessed it, keeping all stakeholders informed and participating when you need them to is a project manager's biggest job. That's because stakeholders can and will change during the phases of an activity, and activities aren't always technical or administrative and directly related to the project, but they will definitely influence your project's goals and funding. This can be leadership reorganizations in your company, a competitor being first to market with a product you were hoping to release faster, or mergers with other companies, and you walking into changes in the rules of how to run projects. They may be changes in available funding for IT projects when emergencies or other corporate areas require that money is reallocated on short notice. In fact, in my own experience as a project manager in various companies, this has been the most frequent change that will immediately impact the structure of your team. From having to let people go to having to outsource or even offshore work for cost reasons. This also means that the green cloud on the outside here is practically endless. You may now be asking, how am I supposed to know? That's exactly why a project manager's main task is communication 80% or more of the time, and why the success of a project really stands and falls with a project manager's ability to find the hidden org chart and with their communication skills. There are about as many ways to classify stakeholders as there are personality tests in your favorite social media app. That's because when it comes to figuring out how to deal with people, and that's what stakeholders are, well, mostly, some models can help us predict role-based behaviors and find better strategies to manage them. Here are two of the more time-tested and frequently used models that might help you strategize how to deal with stakeholders. Both of these models describe the stakeholder situation from the perspective of the project manager. On the left side, we see the power interest model. This model tries to classify stakeholders into 4 categories based on their influence or political power in an organization and their interest in or impact on your project. Take a look at the management strategies here, which all have to do, not surprisingly, with communication. For example, it's important to manage closely those stakeholders in the yellow quadrant with high power, high influence, high interest, and high impact. What could that look like? For example, a daily phone check-in with a quick status report and an open ear for their concerns and questions. Perhaps an email follow-up to yesterday's questions or concerns. And certainly the option to reach you through a privileged channel, maybe even your personal cell phone. Now let's not forget the people in the red quadrant, those with low power and influence but with high interest and impact. Those would be the engineers and developers on your team. They may not make the big decisions or provide funding for your project, but the impact if they decide to leave the company and go work somewhere else, that is certainly big. Please pause this video now and think about the blue and the green quadrant. What kinds of stakeholders would you find in these? And what do the actions of monitor and keep satisfied include here? Now, the model on the right side is called the salience model. This model defines 3 aspects of importance: power, legitimacy, and urgency. And we're seeing 7 different stakeholder personalities. Remember that stakeholders can also be problematic personalities, such as someone demanding a response to their long email 5 minutes after they sent it. That would be a demanding stakeholder. And someone who has both urgency and power would be a potentially dangerous stakeholder. If you don't try to preempt their needs and they become unhappy, they may have the power to shut your project down. Please pause this video for a moment and look at all these types. Try to imagine what kinds of roles and information needs are hiding behind these descriptions. Then come back. One of the most important documents on a project is the stakeholder register. It can take various forms, but most often you'll find a table with the columns you'll see here most useful. I say useful because it's going to be your decision whether to make the stakeholder register an official published project document or not. When an organization's project management methodology, that is its rulebook, requires this document, I actually like to keep 2 versions. Here's why. Some of the columns you're seeing here, like opinion and impact, and even management strategy and issues and resolution, they record your observation about people in or outside the organization. In some cases, these observations can be not so flattering. That's why it may be a good idea to keep some of this information confidential. How do you get to a plan like this? The most important step is this: identify all the stakeholders and determine exactly the information and the level of collaboration they need from you in order to be successful in their work. You will also need to find out their attitude towards you and your project because, let's face it, not every stakeholder is a positive stakeholder. And within every organization, there are people with political interests that may not agree with the goals or the funding level of your project, or even with your personality. So in order to be successful, you will need to classify those stakeholders into groups. And this is where the models we have previously seen, such as the power influence model or the salience model, or honestly any other easily accessible model that can help you craft a unified approach to managing certain groups of stakeholders, becomes useful. For these purposes, it is important to take some time to think about how they might respond to changes on your project. For example, scope changes and change requests, schedule extensions, rising or falling numbers, risks, that kind of thing. This is where asking a mentor, such as a senior employee in the organization who you know will support you, can be extremely helpful. The same is true for classifying the stakeholder engagement levels. A basic way to identify stakeholder engagement levels and to get from a stakeholder register to a project communication plan is through a RACI or RACI chart. A RACI chart is a simple matrix used to assign roles and responsibilities for each task, milestone, or decision on a project. By clearly mapping out which roles are involved in each project task and at which level, you can eliminate confusion and answer the age-old project question, who's responsible for what? RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consult, and Informed. Please pause this video to review these definitions. At its core, a RACI matrix helps you set clear expectations about project roles and responsibilities, and those are key to ensuring that everyone gets the responsibility and the communication they need. A RACI matrix also encourages team members to be accountable for their work or defer to someone else when needed. Essentially, you'll remove personal judgment and politics from your process and focus on your stakeholders' ability to act responsibly within a framework you've created. Sounds pretty good, huh? Here is what a RACI or RACI chart looks like. You can make it very quickly and easily in your favorite spreadsheet app. Simply follow these 3 steps here. You enter all project roles or team member names across the top row. Then you list the tasks or the milestones or the decisions down the left column. And then for each item in the left column, you assign a responsibility value to each role or to each person on the team. In a best case scenario, you'd sit down with your team to walk through the role assignments on each task, but let's be real, that's not always possible. Just be sure everyone represented on your RACI chart has acknowledged and agreed to the roles and responsibilities you've laid out. More importantly, you want to check that your matrix eliminates any further project confusion. Once your RACI chart is complete, review it to be sure it follows some simple rules. Every task should have at least one responsible person, and there's one and only one accountable party assigned to each task to allow for clear decision-making. No team member should be overloaded with too many responsible tasks. And every team member has a role on each task. It's not uncommon for some folks to be informed on most tasks. If you have a lot of consulted and informed roles on your matrix, make sure you have an easy and lightweight way to keep them informed. It could be as simple as making sure everyone has access to your project plan so they can follow progress along the way. Or sharing a view-only link to your project plan is a great option for looping in folks outside of your organization. Here is what we have discussed in this module. 70 to 80% of a project manager's job is to communicate with all the stakeholders on the project, from the technician who has just replaced the hard drive in your computer to the vice president of finance who ensures that your project has sufficient funding. That's why PMI has allocated 2 knowledge areas to successful interpersonal relationships: project communication management and project stakeholder management. We have seen how to identify stakeholders inside and outside the organization and how to classify them so that you can manage their expectations more effectively using a stakeholder management plan or stakeholder register, and how to clarify each stakeholder's responsibilities in a RACI chart. Here are the words that you have learned in this module. Please ensure that you can define and explain each one of them. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in a future video.